Hey everybody, I hope that you are doing well. Today we are going to continue with the virtual lessons with a really big concept known as federalism. So we're going to be talking today about the relationship between the various state governments and also we're going to be detailing the local government and the government of Virginia as well. So that's what we have in store. It's important to keep in mind that we are a nation that is not just one country, but rather a collection. We have a national government, we have 50 state governments, and then countless local governments of various makes and models. So it's important to keep in mind that wherever you are in the country, that you fall within many different governments. So we're going to detail that now. So the actual official motto of the country is E Plumeris Unum. This is on much of the currency. It's our kind of national slogan. And that's actually fairly reflective of what we're talking about today. Out of many, one. Think of the very name of our country, the United States. So we are not just one country, but also a collection of states. Here is the state capital at Virginia. We'll be talking about that in a bit. So the big idea for today is federalism, the division of power between the national government and the state government. So it's important to keep in mind that the national government in Washington, D.C., and the state governments in Virginia do different things. They have different roles and they perform different jobs. One example, we look to the national government to be in charge of the military by and large. When we go to war, we do so as a national government. However, other things such as building roads and educating children, those are items that we leave up to the state government. So again, some things the national government does and some things the state governments do. And the foundation of the entire concept of federalism is actually directly from the Constitution embodied in the 10th Amendment. This is the actual phrase, word for word, from the 10th Amendment. What the 10th Amendment effectively does, the power is not delegated or given to the U.S. government, the national government, by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. What that suggests and what that says is that if the Constitution does not clearly give a power to the national government, then it is reserved for the state governments. So some things are directly stated in the Constitution, such as the power to tax, the power to declare war, the power to print currency. Because it's mentioned or expressed in the Constitution, those powers are given to the national government. Effectively, what it's saying is anything not directly stated in the Constitution is given to the state governments in terms of their role. So looking at some examples, and actually we'll give you some examples in a second, but the big idea for why we have this concept in the first place, and there are really many reasons, the biggest of them is the first one here. If you spread out power between 50 state governments and not just having all of the power concentrated in one national government, then naturally you're less likely to have some sort of tyrannical or abusive government. So it's the same idea for separation of powers. You spread out the powers between three branches of government. This will ensure that no one branch takes over. It's the same basic idea. If you gave the national government all of the authority and all of the responsibility, then naturally they could take over and become abusive. By spreading out the power, you are limiting the potential for having an abuse of power. Another big thing, and actually, quite frankly, more practical, is different states have different needs. Not every policy that would work in the deserts of Nevada would work in the tropics of Florida. So naturally, if states are able to make their own laws and their own policies, they are better able to rule themselves and to make laws that are more appropriate for those states and for those areas. That's a huge factor. It wouldn't make sense. And quite frankly, it's also more democratic. The fact that we, the people of Virginia, can decide whether or not to have legalized gambling, for example, lets us have our own say. Whereas West Virginia may decide, and they do decide, to have gambling. When you have these smaller units of government, you also are enabling more of the voice of the people to play a role. And then practically, it's also huge here too, kind of a basic feature. If the national government were to make laws for every area, I don't know how they would even go about doing that. You would not be able to have these smaller dynamics. So here again is a map. This is a relatively outdated chart, but it's still, there may have been some new cities or towns that have been formed or taken away. But most of the governments that exist are actually local governments. But again, it all works in kind of a pyramid structure. The US government is supreme. They follow the Constitution. Everything does have to be constitutional. And then all the laws have to kind of line up with the policies that they fall under. So the state governments, their policies must be in accordance and complement the US government. You can't have state laws or state policies contradict federal law and federal policies. Basic vocab, I've already kind of hinted at some of these. Reserve powers not mentioned in the Constitution, therefore, are reserved for the states. Express powers are mentioned in the Constitution, therefore, the federal government is able to do them. And then there's some things that both the federal and the state governments do. We'll get to that right now. So handy chart, kind of a really easy way to think about federalism. These are express powers, things that only the national government does. So these are all things that are mentioned in the Constitution. And quite frankly, the way you can kind of tell them apart is they just kind of make sense. Does the state of Virginia go to war? Or does the entire country go to war? Well, it would be stupid if Virginia declared war. Like, how would that even work? Could you have Virginia be at war with China while Maryland is not? That would be ridiculous. So a lot of the things that only the federal government does, it makes sense for only the federal government to do. Coining money down here. It would be ridiculous. In fact, it was ridiculous under the Articles of Confederation if each state had their own currency. So that is only something that the national government will do. Vice versa, these are the reserve powers that only the state governments do. These are items that are not mentioned in the Constitution. Therefore, it is reserved for the state governments. Nowhere in the Constitution are schools or is education mentioned. Therefore, the states are allowed or are in charge of their own schools, their own education. So these are things that only the state governments do. And then these are shared or concurrent powers, things that both the national governments do and that the state governments do. Here is the state flag of Virginia. I would say we actually have a pretty cool state flag. I am going to move on to get to the state government of Virginia. Big thing I'll just kind of point out here is over the course of our history, the role of the federal government has changed. We used to have it where the states were really much more powerful. In the past, century, and really since the New Deal, we have seen a huge increase in the rise in the role of the federal government. Okay, so Virginia in particular, let's start with the state government and then work down. So Virginia does have its own constitution. Each state has its own constitution. You can read about that online. And we're not going to spend too much time here because the Virginia state government very closely resembles the national government. The big difference is really just the issues that they deal with, along with a few kind of minute differences. So we have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. Again, they do relatively the same basic functions that happen at the national level in terms of how they are organized. So we have a General Assembly for our legislative branch. We have a governor instead of a president in the executive branch. And we still have a state Supreme Court and a state court system in general for the judicial branch. So the legislative branch, all in told is known as the General Assembly. That is our state Congress. We have the House of Delegates over here. This is in Richmond. And the Virginia Senate over here. So we have an upper house and a lower house as well. House of Delegates, 100 members. State Senate, 40 members. You can see the big ideas here. Here's Colonial Williamsburg, the old capital. This is the General Assembly in totality. This is in Richmond. This is where the laws are made for the state of Virginia. Here's the inside of the House of Delegates. Here's each delegate map. So these are the districts that they represent. Here are the state Senate districts. Remember, only 40 state senators. And here's the inside of the Virginia State Senate. So the big issues that they deal with, again, they pass laws, but they are concerned with different issues than would be dealt with at the national level. So big thing, education, public health. The biggest thing they do is to make the budget. When you make a budget, you kind of show where your priorities are based off of what you pay for and what you do not. So again, House of Delegates is the lower house. Virginia State Senate is the upper house. You still need both houses to agree on a law for it to become a law. Moving on, we have a governor instead of a president. Again, same basic idea. They enforce and enact the state laws. Ralph Northam is our governor. The thing I would point out that makes it a little bit funky is in Virginia, governors are not allowed to run for re-election. They can only run for 1 4-year term. They can actually run again after they leave office, but they cannot run for back-to-back terms. That is kind of a quirk of Virginia. So here's our current governor, Ralph Northam. He will not be seeking re-election because he can't. Here's our lieutenant governor, Justin Fairfax. Here's the governor's residence, that is in Richmond. And we also have a Virginia court system. So this is where you would actually be charged if you are accused of a state crime. What I would say, let's get a little line right here. The district court is where you're going to go for minor crimes, for misdemeanors. The circuit court, these are the big court cases for pretty much any felony. And you can actually, just like at the federal level, you can appeal your court decision to the Virginia Court of Appeals and then ultimately to the Virginia Supreme Court. Here's the Williamsburg, James City County Courthouse. Again, if you are charged with a state crime or a local crime, this is where you will actually get your trial. Also, that is where I gave blood. So you can do that there too. Just because you're at court does not mean that you're charged with a crime. Here's and there's courthouses in every county in Virginia. Here's the courthouse in Westmoreland County on the northern neck. And again, just kind of a basic structure. Again, this line I'm drawing shows you original jurisdiction. So here's where you will actually get your trial. And these levels up here, they will not hear your trial. You only go there for the appeals. And actually, this line should be right here. So these courts over here, you get your original trial. The Court of Appeals and the Virginia Supreme Court only deal with appeal cases. That already. And then finally, there are local governments in Virginia. In Virginia, there are 3 types of local government. You have towns, you have counties, which is by far the most common, and then you also have cities. They all operate kind of in their own basic way, but you can have, and you do have, local laws and local policies that have to be obeyed. So here's every county and then all the cities in Virginia. We do need to wrap up here because we're running out of time. Already kind of detailed this. The biggest thing is you have the town councils and the city councils, which actually make laws. And then finally, you have the Board of Supervisors. These are the people that make laws for the counties. So I live in James City County. The laws I have to obey here are made by the Board of Supervisors for James City County. And these are the basic kind of functions of local government. I'll let you peruse that at your leisure. That's going to do it for us, finally, I guess last note. We do have a school board, which of course is in charge of the schools. So that brings us to 15 minutes. Again, kind of an absurd task, condensing an entire unit into 15 minutes, but here we are. Please come to office hours if you have any questions, and I hope that you are well.